Welcome to BK Academy of Chess. This is the final video of this Nimzo-Indian Defense video series. We have covered the two most popular variations, the Rubinstein system and the classical variation. In this video, we cover the Kasparov variation, along with some other sidelines. However, before we get started, let's make one thing clear. It is more important to understand the concepts and ideas, than it is to memorize the lines, especially for beginners. Now let's get started. The Kasparov variation is defined by white playing knight f3, on move 4. Garry Kasparov played this move against Anatoly Karpov in their 1985 World Championship with great effect, scoring 4.5 out of the 6 games played in this variation. White develops the knight to a natural square and waits to see black's reply. So if you were playing the black pieces, how would you play? Pause the video if you need time. Okay, let's continue. d5, transposes to the Nimzo-Indian defense of the Queen's Gambit declined. b6, transposes to the Nimzo/Queen's Indian hybrid line after bishop g5, bishop b7. The most common move is c5, staying within Nimzo-Indian territory. Now if you were playing as white, how would you play? Pause the video if you need time. e3, transposes to the Rubinstein system, but the main move is g3. The main line is considered as follows: c takes d4, knight takes d4, castle kingside. Bishop g2, d5, c takes d5, knight takes d5. Black has depleted white's center, but the bishop on g2 adds pressure to black's queenside, which white may follow up with queen b3. And this completes the Kasparov variation where white plays knight f3, on move 4. Now that we have covered the three most important variations of the Nimzo-Indian defense, let's take a look at some other variations that you may encounter over the board. Starting with the Kasparov variation where white plays f3, on move 5. It has its credentials as Gligoric used it to defeat Fischer, and Alexei who used it with great success in the early 1990s. It is a straightforward attempt to seize control of e4, in the attempts to refute black's plan to control that square. Question: at what cost is it to white for playing f3, and how should black play? Pause the video if you need time. Okay. The answer: at the cost of a slow development. Black's most common reply is d5, a3, bishop takes c3, b takes c3, c5, c takes d5, knight takes d5, a position also reached from the Samisch variation. Black is trying to open the position by adding pressure to c3 and d4, in the attempt to force white to play d takes c5. White will follow up with e4, and black will counter with e5, at some point to prevent white from pushing his e and f pawns further up the board. Another approach for black is to play c5, after which white plays d5, to keep his central pawns together. So how should black play? Pause the video if you need time. Okay. Black's main replies are b5, castle kingside. Bishop takes c3, and knight h5. Also, white could play 5, a3, which transposes to the Samisch variation after bishop takes c3, b takes c3. Another sideline variation is the Leningrad variation where white plays bishop g5, on move 4. Black could try b5, but the main line runs h6, bishop h4, c5, d5, d6, e3, bishop takes c3, b takes c3, e5. Now what do you think about black's position? Should black plan on castling? Pause the video to analyze the position from black's perspective. If black does not plan on castling, then how will black protect the king? Okay. Black has achieved a blockade similar to the Hubner variation. However, white's dark-squared bishop is outside the pawn chain. The pin on the f6 knight is very annoying, and black often finds himself compelled to break it by playing the drastic g5, which also clamps down on the potential f4 break by white. This move weakens black's kingside, so he often will not castle, walking his king to c7, via d8. The Samisch variation is an important sideline variation where white plays a3, on move 4. White gives up a tempo and accepts doubled c-pawns to gain the bishop pair. After bishop takes c3, b takes c3, black has several possibilities, but if black decides to focus on white's weakened double pawns, how should black play? Pause the video if you need time. Okay. After the exchange on c3, black's most common way to play is to immediately blockade the doubled pawns with 5. c5, and then begin applying pressure on the pawn at c4, with the moves bishop a6, knight c6, to knight a5, and rook c8. In the early days of this line, 5. d5 was frequently played, though it was soon realized that this enabled white to liquidate the weakness at c4. Now how should white play? Pause the video if you need more time. White plays to gain a stronghold in the center, in order to play for a king-side attack before black can make use of his static advantages. White has two main options for playing. He can move slowly into the center with e3, or he can play f3, followed by e4, to take a quick hold in the center. However, white's structural weaknesses tend to be larger than his attacking chances. The Fianchetto variation is a sideline where white plays g3, on move 4. White fianchettos his king's bishop to add pressure to the center squares. Black can play c5, which transposes to the Kasparov variation after knight f3. However, d5 is considered the strongest response, because black usually wins the pawn on c4. The Spielman variation is an unusual sideline where white plays queen b3, on move 4. Like the classical variation, it avoids the doubling of white's pawns. However, unlike queen c2, the queen has no control over e4, which black can exploit. For example, c5, d takes c5, knight c6, knight f3, knight e4. And for all those gambiteers, we have the Dilworth gambit where white plays e4, on move 4. The idea of this gambit is to play knight takes c4, queen g4, knight takes c3, bishop d2. However, this open never really caught on, because it's deemed that white doesn't receive enough compensation for the pawn. Playing bishop d2, on move 4 to unpin the knight is common play among amateurs. There is nothing technically wrong with this move, but it is considered to be unambitious. The strategic aim of obtaining the bishop pair without conceding the double pawns fails. For example, bishop takes c3, bishop takes c3, knight e4, white does not get to keep both bishops, and fair trades are usually not in white's interests since white has an advantage in space. That completes this series on the Nimzo-Indian Defense. We presented the most important variations, along with some sidelines, to give you a general overview on how to play with and against the Nimzo-Indian Defense. For most players, it's more important to know the ideas and patterns than it is to memorize the lines. I hope you enjoyed this series and will periodically come back to review and refresh your understanding of the Nimzo-Indian Defense. Thanks for tuning in to BK Academy of Chess.